What's going on, everybody? How are you? Welcome to Luqman Nation, another People's Power lunch in Luqman Nation. And I hope you're watching on Black Power Media, the most dangerous platform on social media. You're watching Luqman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media. Today is Monday, June 27th. Little chilly for our People's Power lunch, and I don't mean chili the food, and in case some of you are having that, I'm not having chili. It's just cold. I mean, it's rainy, it's overcast here in Washington, D.C. So as you all pile into the cafeteria for lunch, I hope you are getting something warm. I have my cup of hot tea in my Black Power Media mug. Isn't it very nice? And we are going to get into this pro-life stuff. It's just such a mess, such a hypocritical mess, which I tried very hard to point out to some members of my family and some family friends this weekend. It was an interesting conversation, but I came to a few conclusions that I think really helped some people with some pretty basic ideas about what being pro life really should be about. But before, folks, we get into that, as you are coming into the cafeteria, I see you with your lunch. What's going on, Comrade Kwame, James Thompson, Victory Jen, Ricky Ryan, Tay C, Sean M, Yipper99. What's going on? Good to see you. Pull up your lunch, make your way over to the microwave, heat up your lunch, and let's have a nice, juicy conversation about a couple of issues that have gone on, obviously, since Friday, since the Supreme Court struck down Roe versus Wade. And I did a quick show Saturday from my dad's house in Fayetteville, North Carolina. He just blurted out that when I said I'm not at home, he's like, "You in Fayetteville, North Carolina?" I'm like, you shouldn't be telling people. Okay, well now everybody knows. So my dad really enjoyed. He really enjoyed that, um, and it's always good to go to my dad and Nikita's house. That's not actually home for me. That's where Nikita, Fayetteville, North Carolina. That's where she's from. That's where her family's from. So that he moved to Fayetteville to help take care of Nikita's mom, and it's the house is it's really wonderful. And if I were to retire in these United States, which I ain't fitting to do, um, I would retire in a place like that with a nice backyard and a nice little shed and a little pool and all that kind of stuff. And it's just really cool. It's really nice to be home. Ah, yeah. So, um, let's see who else is coming to the lunchroom. Jared, what's going on? What's going on, Jab, Doc Jab, and Toby? My dad. Well, now, yeah, he was just he came over and he was like, tell Ted, make sure to tell the people where you are. Like, I'm like somehow sometimes I think he thinks like I'm embarrassed to tell folks that my family is country. I am proud as hell of my country ass family. I really am. So that's really cool. So okay, let's talk a little bit about the Supreme Court, um, and the fact that they need to be abolished. Just you got nine people who are not elected, who are appointed, and are going to sit on the Supreme Court, deciding law for 320, deciding uh, uh, the Constitution and how it applies to 323 million people in this country. Nine unelected people for the rest of their natural lives do that. And we've just been cool with that, accepting that for however long the Supreme Court has been around. I didn't even bother to look it up. That's how lazy I am and how much I don't care about the Supreme Court anymore. It needs to be abolished right along with the entire system that the Supreme Court exists in, right? Because when you think about it, the Constitution itself was written by a bunch of land owning or otherwise wealthy white men, many of whom owned other human beings who looked like us. They were our ancestors. And not only did they own, many of them own uh, human beings who look like us, they also lived in a society and upheld the societal moray that women didn't have any rights, that women didn't have a right to vote, they didn't have a right to uh, participate in electoral politics in any way, they didn't have a right to own land, that none of that, unless of course they could own slaves, then yeah, they could do that. But but yeah, I mean, so at the time the Constitution was written, and this was in the argument that the majority decision from the Supreme Court came. You're not late, Marion. I actually started a little bit late today, so you're right on time. So the Supreme Court justices, the conservative, excuse me, justices who issued their majority decision, said that one of the reasons they ruled the way they did in regard to Roe v. Wade was because when the Constitution was written, abortion was illegal. First of all, that's a damn lie. That's not even true. And the fact that these people who graduated from Harvard, Yale, all of these, storied Ivy League institutions can sit there on the Supreme Court and blatantly lie through their teeth about the history of abortion in this country, number one, lets you know that these people have no moral standing to decide anything for anyone else at all, let alone should they be on anybody's Supreme Court interpreting a document that is supposed to enumerate laws and rights for everybody in this country. It is not true that abortion was illegal when the Constitution was written. Abortion was actually not criminalized in this country until around the 19th century. Early 19th, it really was not. That there was, and the move, and we talked to Hannah Dickinson of Breaking the Chains magazine today on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik. So tune in at 2 o'clock right after this piece and hear and listen to that segment with her, where she talks about the history of a very brief history, but the history of the criminalization of abortion, and why it was done, who it was targeted toward. Very important distinction, or very important information to know, that these people, in making this decision to overturn Roe versus Wade, flat out lied about abortion being illegal in 1770, whenever it was that the Constitution was written. Don't care. It needs to be burned anyway. That's the first issue. And then the second issue is the fact that when the Constitution was written, like I said, I think on Saturday, our ancestors were enslaved and women didn't have any rights. So Amy Coney Barrett shouldn't be a justice if they're talking about what was going on in this country when the Constitution was written. And Clarence Thomas shouldn't be a justice. And not only should Clarence Thomas not be a justice, but um, he shouldn't be married to his white wife because that was illegal too. You see the levels of hypocrisy. Yeah. So when we see more decisions coming from the Supreme Court that are going to be along the lines of this very narrow and really dishonest in regard to actual history and a very particular, a conservative religious bent, then things start to make more sense. These people are not actually interpreting the Constitution. They're actually being the activist judges that the religious right has been fighting to install on the Supreme Court for 50 years. This is an example. What's going on with the Supreme Court right now is an example of how the conservatives have always played the long game. And as bad as the results of their actions and organizing are for us, I keep saying this is a lesson for us in how we need to organize. The point here is not that they win. The point is how they won, how they got here. So when we look at other Supreme Court cases, they just ruled on this case of this coach um, in Bremerton, Washington, who used to like pray on the 50-yard line after the game was over. And the details in this case were really actually very interesting. But first, the Supreme Court ruled in his favor that he had a constitutional right to publicly pray on public school property after a football game. Um, and they made this decision less than a week after the court ruled by the same 6-3 margin. Let me, yeah, get that a little bit bigger. That Maine could not exclude religious schools from tuition program, which means now that the Supreme Court has rules that federal public funds can go to religious schools. And again, with Roe versus Wade, this is not an issue about anything other than white conservatives who call themselves Christians finally realizing their long game in having the Supreme Court overturn legislation or laws that they thought um, kept them from fully realizing their power. So this case with this football coach is another one of those kinds of rulings. The justices, let's see, who is this? This was Joseph Kennedy. No, Neil Gorsuch, writing for the majority, said the prayers of the coach, Joseph Kennedy, were protected by the First Amendment. He said because respect for religious expressions is indispensable to life in a free and diverse republic, whether those expressions take place in a sanctuary or on a field, and whether they manifest through the spoken word or bowed head, he wrote. Here, a government entity sought to punish an individual for engaging in a brief, quiet religious observance. Here's the thing about this particular part of this decision. This man's prayers were actually not brief and quiet. Apparently, this dude, he started out at the end of the game, going to the 50-yard line, saying, hey, thank God, or whatever. And then other players started joining him because he's the coach of the team. And of course, these kids feel compelled to join in. And then another coach one at one point says, "Hey, it's neat what you're doing." And this, I guess the school board didn't even realize he was doing it. So the school board is like, "Look, you can't do that. You can't pray in the middle of the field at the end of the game because the kids are going to think that, this is something that the school is sanctioning, that the team is sanctioning, and we don't we don't promote religion, so you can't do that." And he used to actually do pray also in the locker room, so he stopped doing that. And then he alerted the media. He claimed that he was disciplined and punished for doing it, but he actually wasn't. He told the media that he was under attack. He actually wasn't. And then he created this campaign basically, and told people, I am going to, at the next game, I am going to prove to you how repressive they are. So he had already told the media about this. So there's this media presence at the next game where he makes a big show of going to the 50-yard line and praying loudly for the media's benefit that he called. And then the school board was like, "All right, dude, that's enough. That's enough." So even in this decision from uh which one was it again? Gorsuch, this isn't even true. It just blows my mind. Who is giving these people, who is doing the research for these people on the Supreme Court? What the hell are these clerks doing where they can't even get the basic ass facts right about the cases that these folks are deciding on? This isn't even true. Wasn't a brief, quiet, personal religious observance. So let's see. Of course, Kennedy is like, "Oh, this is just so awesome. All I've ever wanted was to be back on the field with my guys." Well, you could have been if you had stopped conducting a school sanctioned prayer led by the head coach in the middle. You could have been. He could have had a prayer service at his house. He could have taken the team to the local McDonald's parking lot. He could have done anything if he wanted to pray with his team, but he didn't have to do it on school grounds. Anyway, yeah. Um, let's see. Yeah, so this is a part of how the case unfolded. And I know I highlighted something else down here. Oh, yeah. Gorsuch said the message of the decision in favor of Mr. Kennedy was straightforward. "The Constitution and the best of our traditions," he wrote, "counsel mutual respect and tolerance, not censorship and suppression for religious and non religious views alike." Oh, yeah? I want to put that to the test. I do. Because now, you know what I want to happen, y'all? I want all of my Jewish family. I want all of my Muslim family. I want all of our atheist friends. I want all of our Wiccan friends. I want all of our Satanist friends. I want everybody who has any kind of religious or not religious belief to put that to the test. It really that all religious expression is encouraged and not censored? I want to see something. I want to see something because you and I know doggone well that this foolishness that this man wrote. Let me share it. I'm sorry. I thought I had shared it, but I was not sharing it when I read it. This foolishness that Gorsuch wrote in this decision, the Constitution counsels mutual respect and tolerance, not censorship and suppression for religious and non-religious views alike. Yeah, you and I know that ain't true. But I want it since it is now the law of the land. I want to see something. Y'all, all of you all with whatever religious views you have, please conduct your religious observances at the end of football games, baseball games, basketball games, at the end of cheerleader tryouts, at the in the cafeteria at lunchtime. Do please let's put this ruling to the test, and let's see just how fast people in power will go to suppress the freedom of expression of people who are not of the Christian faith. Yeah, I want to see something. Let's put it to the test. So was something, this whole idea of uh, Christianity being legislated in this country, which is certainly what's happening. And I was having this argument, it did turn into an argument with some folks in my family when we were talking about the Supreme Court ruling against Roe versus Wade. And I, being a Christian, my daddy is an elder in the Church of God in Christ, very folks, my family, very holy people. I made it clear, listen, this is not about anybody's personal opinion about the issue of abortion. It is not about how I feel about abortion. It's not about how you feel about abortion. This is all about women having the right to determine our own reproduction, to have control over our own bodies. End of story. That's it. And they just didn't see it that way because some folks are just like, well, pro life, we're pro life. So I'm just sitting there, I'm like, I don't think you guys understand what it really does mean to actually be pro life. And as I'm talking to people and I'm trying to steer folks away from, demanding how I personally feel about abortion, I'm like, this is not how you feel about abortion issue. This is an issue about bodily autonomy and people having the right to do with their bodies what they choose, what is best for them. And they just weren't getting it. Because it was pro-life, pro-life. And I was like, okay, I tell you what, let's say that you all are right, that you all are pro-life. And you are very concerned about the life of children. You want to protect the lives of children. So then I said, if you are pro-life, and you're deeply ideologically opposed to abortion because you think it is ending a life, then if you're pro-life, then you should be fighting for universal health care, right? And they were just like, huh? And I said, well, look, universal health care would include prenatal care for women. And this would address the issue of maternal mortality in this country. That's why prenatal care is very important for the health of the mother and the child. In 2020, the CDC, because I like my statistics, the CDC reported that 861 women died of natural causes in the US in childbirth, compared to 754 in 2019. That's an increase. That's overall. That's a rate of 23.8 deaths per 100,000 live births. But for Black women, the maternal mortality rate is 55.3 deaths per 100,000 live births. So are we just pro-life in regard to making sure the baby lives? Or are we concerned about mama living too, especially when mama is Black? Mama looks like us. And that rate for Black women, it's 2.9 times the rate for white women. Universal health care, by the way, would also address the infant mortality rate, which is at 5.4 deaths per 100,000 live births in the US, and it was at 20 in 2020. But for Black babies, 10.6. More than double. And that's compared to just 4.5 of white babies. So universal health care, if you're pro-life now, universal health care would make sure that all mothers have adequate health care to ensure that they and their babies survive childbirth. If you're pro life, you ought to be fighting for universal health care. And then I talked about how, if you're pro life, because folks are like, okay, fine, fine, I agree with that. I agree with that. So then I said, okay, cool. Well, if you agree with that, and if you're pro life, then you should be fighting for affordable housing, fully subsidized by the state. Didn't get it. I said, okay, well, think about it this way: unsafe and inadequate housing is stressful for single folks, for just a person, and adults, just all by ourselves. Imagine the additional stress of being pregnant and not having secure housing, not having affordable housing, being on a waiting list for public housing that is 20 years long. That's not an exaggeration. The waiting list for public housing in Washington, D.C. is like 18 years long. And you are pregnant, and you don't know where you are going to lay your head, let alone where you are going to raise a child. Not having housing at all for you and for your baby that's coming. So ensuring that children have adequate housing, that's pro-life, right? Yeah. And I'm asking, folks this, and I'm seeing the wheels turning in their head. And I'm like, uh-oh, I'm on a roll. So let me keep going. And so then I said, all right, I can understand that you're pro-life and you're opposed to abortion, and I'm not going to be mad at you for that because that's how you personally feel. But if you are pro-life, then you should be fighting for free and universal childcare and pre-K education for all the babies. Well, I don't know. Well, wait a minute. What do you mean you don't know? Let's talk about how UNICEF says that every child has a right to social protection as enshrined in the Convention of the Rights of the Child and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they didn't know what these documents were, and I showed them. And you should know too. Look them up. However, an estimated 1.3 billion children around the world are not covered by any form of social protection, and only a quarter of the households around the world have access to cash support. That's right, the government giving families money to support their children. Why is that important? Because people were like, no, we can't just be giving people money. I'm like, oh, yeah? Well, when you do that, when you provide cash support for families with children, that actually prevents, or sorry, when you don't provide cash support for families with children, that actually keeps them from fulfilling their potential. Because kids need to eat, they need clothes, they need health care, and particularly in countries that are quote unquote underdeveloped, but we know that they are kept underdeveloped by capitalism, neocolonialism, and imperialism. The lack of that support for children is deadly to them. Multiple studies from several countries around the world show that social protections for children, like universal child care and universal pre K and cash support, improve children's well being across the board, including in health, in nutrition, and education. Why? Because kids are being fed, kids are having their health needs met, they're being taught in pre K. That's pro life, right? Yeah. But guess what? The US doesn't have protections like that for children. Families are to this day fighting to maintain TANF in most cases, in most states, which is like the first social program that politicians cut when they talk about they have budget issues. They literally take money away from families to feed their children. Making sure that we don't do that and we provide support for children. That's pro life, right? Yeah. So people were kind of starting to get it. So, me, Certainly not one to miss an opportunity. I continue. And then I said, okay, fine. You understand why it's important to have these things in society to support families being able to raise children. But if you're pro life, you should also be fighting for a federal living wage for all workers and for unions and for paid maternity and paternity leave and paid sick leave and paid vacations. Why? Because you know what? We Christians have this weird obsession with women staying at home and raising their kids as if that's the only thing we're supposed to do because the Bible said that's our job as women. That's actually not true, but that we're on that kick and it's ridiculous. But the fact of the matter is most of us cannot afford, most human beings cannot afford to stay at home, to be a stay at home anything. But certainly most mothers, parents can't afford to have babies and be able to stay at home and be stay at home moms because, you know, capitalism. Capitalism and austerity is out there kicking our behinds. So, working moms need to know that they won't lose their job if they get pregnant, that mom and dad will be able to take time off to recover and bond with the baby when the baby's born. They need to know that they won't lose pay when they have to take off work to take care of a sick baby because babies get sick. And if they are sick, and if they are sick, they need to be able to take off and take care of themselves too without losing pay. And parents should be able to take some time off to make happy memories with their kids, with their families, and not be forced to choose between I got to go to work or, I have to have some time with my family. Ensuring that society doesn't force parents to choose between their job and their family and their children, that's pro life. But the US doesn't provide guarantees for any workers like that. No. And at this point, folks were like, well, yeah, that's wrong. That's kind of messed up. One or two folks are like, well, my company that I work for, like if you work for a company that does that for you, that is what that particular company offers that you are lucky enough to get because you were chosen to work for that company. I'm talking about providing this for everyone in this company, as in this country, also accurate company, as a human right. If we're really talking about pro life, we ought to be fighting for making sure that every worker, every working family has the opportunity to actually take care of their families and work without fear of losing either because they have to choose one or the other. So fewer people were angry at me at this point. So I figured, you know what? Let's just go all in then. Okay, if you're pro life and if you just don't like abortion and you want to stop abortion, okay, cool. Then you should be fighting for a clean environment. You should be fighting for clean air, clean water, clean earth, for a healthy physical environment for children to be raised in. Why is this important? A Stanford University led study actually recently showed, it was published in 2021, February 2021, showed that children exposed to air pollution like wildfire smoke and car exhaust for as little as 1 day experience altered gene regulation that could lead to higher rates of, get this, heart disease, respiratory illnesses, and other chronic diseases that manifest in adulthood. So, fighting climate change and fighting for stronger environmental protections is actually a part of fighting for children and a better and more healthy and more safe environment for them to grow up in. And what is that, y'all, if that's not pro life? Isn't that protecting life? Absolutely, it is. They actually agreed with me. Well, yeah, it is agreed. It is pro life. I mean, everybody should have clean water. Everybody should, nobody should be having to breathe in pollution all the time. And yeah, kids should have a safe, clean place to play. Pro life. So if you're pro life, why are you focusing on abortions and not focusing on that? What? So I figure, there weren't that many people mad at me at this point. So I just went whole hog. I said, well, I'm going to put all my chips in and see where they fall. So I said, and honestly, if you really want to talk about your pro life and you hate abortion because you think that abortion is tantamount to the killing of children, then you need to be opposing war. If you are sitting here telling me that you are anti abortion because you think that abortion is murder, then you should be opposing this $54 billion that the Biden administration has sent to Ukraine just since February to kill Russians, for Ukraine to kill Russians, but a bunch of Ukrainians are being killed instead. And this is, of course, after 8 years of Ukrainians being killed who were ethnic Russians, but that was a whole nother conversation. $54 billion that this government sent to Ukraine for war, rather than spending that money on the poor here, and particularly rather than spending that money on poor women and families to provide a stronger safety net for them to be able to sustain a child's life in this society in a healthy and supportive way, so that the child lacks nothing and the parents are supported, mama and daddy. But I also said that y'all should also be opposed to US war and imperialism in general, because how can you talk about you believe that abortion is murder and you don't want anyone in the US having an abortion because you're pro life and you love children, but you're not concerned about how children around the world are impacted by US imperialism and war? How are you more concerned about saving babies by ending abortion than you are about the babies in Somalia, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Mali, in Libya, Haiti, Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Zimbabwe, Iran, and other countries that this government has either directly attacked with military actions like coups or drone bombings? And then we had to have a whole conversation about when has the U.S. when has the U.S. propped up a coup? And it was like, get out a piece of paper and okay, let me write some stuff. Coups, drone bombing, but also through sanctions, which are acts of war. They're violations of international law and human rights, and they deprive the citizens of the countries that are sanctioned of food, medicine, infrastructure that impacts people's daily lives, and that includes children. So how are y'all so focused on saving the lives of babies by ending abortion, but you're not concerned about saving the lives of babies by ending war? So at the end of the conversation, I mean, I'm happy to say that it's like not everybody was a convert, and I wasn't expecting um to convert people, because that's not why I engage in these kinds of conversations with friends, family, whomever. I engage in these kinds of conversations because um, I need to share the information. This is what political education is. If you can't engage in this level of political education with your family and your friends, what is you even doing? You practice on them. That's what I do. I use it as practice, because they ask questions that I have to figure out how to pivot away from, and sometimes the questions make sense. Sometimes they just do it because they like to antagonize me and see how much it's going to take for me to get all pissed off. But but really, it's to share information. It is for political education. But at the end of the conversation, interesting things did happen. So we were talking about all of the things that this government really should be doing in providing the kind of environment that is conducive to raising children, a healthy environment, a supportive environment, a safe environment that this government is not doing, is not providing, and people are not, the people who are pro life are not demanding that this government provide those things to support life. And a couple of things, interesting things happened. People were like, well, why should the government be doing all of that? The government shouldn't be doing all of that. And then as a Christian, I'm like, oh, yeah? So what do you think Jesus was doing when he went into the temple, which was the religious establishment, the government for the people at the time outside of the Roman government? That was a whole different issue, but Jesus was making a point about the religious establishment that governed the daily lives of people at the time. And he went into the temple and he ran the money changers out because they were exploiting the people, taking advantage of the people. That was one example. The second example is when Jesus tells the Sadducees and the Pharisees, when they condemned him for healing someone for free on the Sabbath. And Jesus is like, what difference does it make what day it is? He needed to be healed. And by the way, what have y'all done? Y'all got all the religious knowledge, you religious leaders, the government of the people at the time. And what do you do? What do you do with it? You don't do anything to help people. This man needed help. But rather than help him, you make the argument that, well, today's Sunday, we can't give you help today. And he said, in that way, you do nothing but oppress the people with the law rather than to meet the people's needs. And because of that, you are a generation of vipers and snakes. I'm convinced that Jesus actually said some words that were a lot more powerful than that. But basically, Jesus was telling the religious order of the day, the government of the people, you are not doing anything to help the people, and it is your job to. So, how are we as people of faith who have this example of the Christ who did socialist things like feeding 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread, didn't ask them whether they had their own lunch, were they hungry, where were they going, did you show up for the sermon or did you just show up for lunch? He said, no, people are here, feed them, that's it. The early church pooled all of their resources together and divided up everything that was pulled together and redistributed everything to all the people in the community to make sure that no one went without. That's actually in the Bible. So we're having these conversations about what's actually in the Bible, what Jesus actually did, and what these things meant. And all of a sudden, some of these people get the idea that wait a minute. We're supposed to be demanding that our government takes care of us because it's actually in there. And yes, maybe it wasn't called socialism at the time, but communalism was absolutely a concept right there in the book, that the wealth of the community should be redistributed to all in the community so no one goes without, so that no one is lacking. That's in there. So all of a sudden, some people realize, wait, so socialism isn't a bad thing. So maybe if we're serious about fighting for children and being pro-life, maybe we should be fighting for this government to actually pass policies that support life and not just keep women from controlling their own reproduction. Not everybody was there. Some folks were still very much, look, I'm never going to be supportive of abortion, and abortion is murder. And I was like, well, okay, that's cool. But that's also not the point. That's also not the issue. The issue is, do we have a society that is actually conducive to supporting the human rights of all life? And we don't. And for those of us, people of faith, for too long, we have allowed the religious conservatives, and I hesitate calling them religious, but the white Christo-fascists, we have allowed them to dominate the narrative about abortion and make it the issue while ignoring systemic issues of inequality that affect particularly working, poor, Black, Indigenous, immigrant women in this country. But we've also allowed liberals to use abortion as the only part of reproductive justice that matters. So, in this conversation, I readily admit I had to work through helping people to move beyond how you personally feel about abortion to looking at reproductive justice from not just this little myopic one issue to the larger issue that it really is, including everything that I talked about and even more things that I couldn't think about at the time that are a part of reproductive justice. And abortion is a part of that, but it's not the only thing. So it was an interesting conversation. And I do appreciate, when my family is willing to engage with me and stuff like that, because it's not an easy conversation to have. It's very uncomfortable, and it can be very personal because in Christian communities we hide a lot of our shortcomings. And you never know, you literally never know when someone has had an experience with something that you're talking about and they're too ashamed to chime in because they don't want to be judged. So that's always something that's always in the back of my mind when I have these kinds of conversations about these issues like that. But if we are serious about shaping a society built on uh, people centered human rights for all, then we have to expand these conversations from, these um, religious right crafted culture war issues. That because that's what this really is. This is a culture war issue that the religious right created in order to gain prominence in American politics, because there was a time before the religious right existed that Christians actually were not concerned about abortion. It was not something that was talked about in a lot of Christian circles, because guess what? It's actually not mentioned in the Bible. So there's a lot more that I could say about this, but we're running out of time. But I want to leave you with some resources that I think are very important, that I think will be helpful for you, like they were helpful for me as I went through this conversation. The first is from one of my favorite sources. All of these, with the exception of one which I wasn't very aware of until recently, are my favorite sources for information and edification. Our friends at Hood Communist, This is from April 28th. Our girl, Erica Kane's Culture Wars and the Lessons We Still Aren't Learning. You have got to read this. It is absolutely fantastic in where we are today with this issue. And then, let's see. I'm wondering if I just click on the other tab. Nope, it doesn't do it. All right, so I need to unclick and then go to the other tab and then share this link for the Black Alliance for Peace's recent webinar with and I loved this so much. It was so good. There was no way I could share this. I could not share this with you. A recent webinar that the Black Alliance for Peace did with Dr. Patricia Rodney and Dr. Sandy Placido and Devin Springer about public health and people-centered human rights and Black liberation. They talk about reproductive justice in this webinar. It's fantastic. It is so amazing. That's a great source. And then I was just hipped to this episode of Groundings podcast. This is Groundings. I think this is Dev Springer's joint. They talk about the struggle for reproductive justice, and they talk about all of the issues that I raised, and I'm sure some other ones, and I keep forgetting that I'm not sharing my screen. There we go. But that link I just dropped in the chat for you, I believe. And another podcast episode, and I keep hearing about citations needed, and I honestly, I just don't have time to listen to every podcast that I want to, that I need to, but I was just hip to this episode of Citations Needed, which also covers this issue of reproductive justice and the struggle for it. More Supreme Court rulings to come this week. There is going to be a very important Supreme Court ruling involving the EPA, in which I think the case is whether the EPA can continue to direct states to limit emissions, I believe. Let me see. Let me look. Yeah. The next big Supreme Court case, since we did talk about the need for um, us to fight for a society in which the environment is conducive to support life. A pro-life issue is fighting for regulation of emissions from power plants. So the Supreme Court is going to decide, or at least the case is on the docket this week for the Supreme Court to decide if the EPA has the authority to regulate emissions from power plants. Whew, good Lord. And it's wild that CNN actually frames this as a dispute that could harm the Biden administration's attempt to slash emissions. No, this case could harm the ability for human beings to breathe clean air and live in this country if they rule that the EPA does not have the authority to regulate emissions from power plants, which I think that is exactly how they are going to rule. I believe the Supreme Court is going to rule against the EPA. So some other cases that are coming up on the Supreme Court docket, the Remain in Mexico case. Also, I didn't know about this one at all. Congress's War Powers Work Protection for Veterans. Um, the court could weaken work protections for veterans. And this is very interesting. I really feel like I need to have somebody on to talk about this because I don't think I would do it justice if I tried to explain it. So I would really love to have somebody on to talk about this case, um, and how the court could rule in regard to whether the state has jurisdiction to um, adjudicate crimes committed on native lands. Very interesting and very important cases upcoming that we should be watching for with the Supreme Court. I think the most important is obviously the one regarding the EPA, because if the Supreme Court rules that the EPA cannot regulate emissions, then we all uh, that means we all die from some type of pollution related disease, or suffer and die from some type of pollution related disease. Uh, uh, Energy companies will immediately stop adhering to emissions regulations. That, yeah, it's going to be an absolute disaster, and environmental nightmare. So yeah, that's it. So okay, so that's our lunch for today. I hope you guys enjoyed your lunch. I enjoyed hanging out with you this afternoon. And I'm sorry I didn't get to a lot of your comments, but I was trying to get through everything today. Um, a lot going on this week. I think tomorrow I will not be having lunch with you guys, but I'll be back Wednesday. So behave yourselves until then. Have a great day. Enjoy each other. Be good to each other. Take care of each other. And as always, friends and comrades, luta continua. The struggle continues, but Victoria acerta. Victory is certain. I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.